Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This series has been emphasizing the influence of culture, worldview on the concept and topic of origins. We're going through right now a series from the standpoint and perspective of a non-Western biblical thinking parameter, perspective on the different topics of origins. In this series, we're talking about the origin of time and how the concept of time can be harmonized between the scriptures, the biblical record, and what modern day science teaches about how old the universe and all the processes are. We're in number 5, lecture number 5. We're terminating this topic and this series. But what's just to be understood is that culture has a real influence on our thinking processes. And again, that's what we keep kind of hammering, is that we have to understand the culture. And no matter what relationship we're establishing or entering into, is to understand the culture of the other and that they perceive things differently than I do, and to understand that standpoint and to value that standpoint, because it is a standpoint taken from experience, from personal experience, and it represents their personality, their person of who they are, their individualism, and that is what is, I believe, to be respected. And even though I may not see things the same way, and that's why we go back to the quote by Stephen Jay Gould, we may not see things the same way because of culture, because of theory, habit, and prejudice, those 4 factors, but that does not mean I should not accept or at least look at from their perspective, from their standpoint. Try to understand things from what they're looking at. The origin of time. We come back to, okay, we've gone over is that there's been different strategies among Christians, among the evangelical world, of how to accommodate the days of Genesis with the millions and billions of years of modern day science. And just saying that those numbers and beliefs are from 2 different belief systems which aren't really logical, rational to combine or trying to harmonize without destroying the other system. And so it's kind of like, okay, we need to be consistent at whatever rules we apply. If we are taking the book, the scriptures, we need to apply the same rules in Genesis as we would at the last chapter, taking into consideration the context of what we're looking at. And so in other words, we don't always, or should not always, apply a literal interpretation if it is obvious that it is not literal. But in looking at the first chapters of Genesis, the Hebrews took it as a literal historical account. And we, as Westerners, tend to try to, using our philosophical bent, using our perspective, we try to impose a different interpretation upon it that is more congruent with or more agrees with our standpoint. But now the question is, what does the non-Western standpoint then do with all of the scientific evidence that shows that everything is millions and billions of years in process? What can be said? Well, first, going back to the quote by Stephen Jay Gould, is that first, facts do not come to us as objective items as seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. But theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and in the way in which we perceive them. So again, just hammering on this quote by Stephen Jay Gould, just recognizing that the scientific evidence is evidence proposed by a consensus that these are the rules of how to interpret by. And what are the rules? We went over them in a previous lecture series on the Western House. They start with a closed system. No miracles, no God, no intervention, and that everything is natural elements, natural processes, natural uniformitarian principles, in that if you adopt those belief systems, then you would adopt the conclusions or the evidences proposed by that system. But if you don't adopt those same belief systems, then you don't need to accept the evidence proposed. But isn't the evidence overwhelming against a certain position? And it's kind of like, well, what are the basic belief systems? Let's go back to what are the basic belief systems or basic assumptions of a scientific model. We're talking about Welt model of different models. Remember, it starts with a Weltbild, which is the world picture. Then it goes into action, into viewing the world through that picture. That's the Weltanschauung, the worldview, and then the worldview produces a practice, a habit, which is the Welt model. So what scientific model, what are the assumptions? Number one, it's either an open or closed system, which corresponds to either a Western or a non-Western type of cultural standpoint. What do you choose? And what you choose is a personal preference to start with. But if you're going to practice today in the world, then you often have to practice according to the consensus of the group that you want to become part of. And so if you want to become part of a group, then you have to concede your personal standpoint and practice according to a consensus of the standpoint. So what is your system? Is it open or is it closed? Second, what is the chosen source of reliable knowledge? What is your chosen source of knowledge? Where does it come from? Is it humanistic? Is it human-centered logic? Is it my thought processes from inside of me? Or is it a more of a non-Western type of bias, which is an external source of authority and knowledge, which would be revealed scripture in an open system? Number three, the basic beliefs that are assumed. We assume basic beliefs. Based on our source of reliable knowledge, we get basic beliefs. Basic beliefs, what that means is a belief system that is basic, that we don't defend and can't defend, but they are basic to our thinking processes. Then we have justified beliefs later in the thought processes, but they're justified. But the basic beliefs are beliefs that are basic to my thinking processes. Then the methods employed. If my methods employed are epistemological methods, which are empiricism, which means all reality to be real has to be empirically provable and tested, well, then that leaves out the whole spiritual dimension as being untrue or as unreal, because my method is empiricism, which then no spirit world can be subject to an empirical method. So my methods that I adopt will limit as to what can be real and what can be true. Then, according to the basic beliefs, my methods will be employed according to the basic beliefs of the system. So those correspond to Stephen Jay Gould's culture, prejudice, theory, and habit. Culture is open or closed system. What do I assume? And prejudice is my basic beliefs, that I have to have something in order to judge, to analyze, to observe. I have to have a network. I have to have a system in place. That is my prejudging system, my prejudice. And a theory, a theorem, a theory is based on the Greek word to view, to see things. As spectator comes from the same word, theory. And so theory is I look out at the world through my prejudice, through my culture, and then I form a habit. And that habit is, this is the way I continually do it without even thinking now about culture, theory, or habit, or prejudice. I just habitually do something without realizing sometimes that what is basis behind it all. So those are the basic assumptions of a scientific model. And each scientific model is going to produce scientific data. Do I have to accept scientific data produced by every model? And it's no, not if it is a model that is based on assumptions that you don't agree with. Then you're not going to agree with their products or with their what they have produced. Okay, modern day science is based on a closed system. So what does that mean? Well, we're talking about time, and time is one of the essential resources that the modern day science has as its resources. It is a closed system, and it was based on 4 basic resources: matter, energy, time, and chance. And so time is a very essential element to showing the reality or the whole system. If there is no time available, then the naturalistic system is kind of teetering, because time is one of its basic elements. And if there's not enough time, then there's trouble. But if time can be shown that there is or there was, then the naturalistic system remains a possibility. But so anyway, the closed system needs time. That's why time is an important element, and that's why it's debated, is that how much time has there actually been. Time is necessary for the existence of all the elements from a singular element. And so in other words, if we began with helium, or we began with whatever element is basic, and all other elements have been produced by the decay rate of that one element, then yeah, there needs to be a whole lot of time. How much time? We don't know, because we've never produced something by decaying of something else, but we have seen that there are different elements that elements decay into. So yes, if there was a singular element in a closed system, then time is necessary. The existence of soil, that is a product of erosion. Does that need time? Yes, that needs a lot of time. If we have so many feet of soil that's in the basins, that's in the valleys, then yes, time would be necessary to erode in a common way the hard surfaces, the rock and etc., to form soil. So there would be time that's necessary. The evolution of life from non-life, is time necessary? If that happened, yes, that would require a lot of amount of time to overcome the singularity of the event, because it hasn't happened again. So that means it was a one-time thing that happened, if evolution is true. So time would be necessary. How about the diversification of life then, from a single cell to complex life of what we have today? Yes, there would be an enormous amount of time, if that were possible, to even make life from non-life to complex life. The geological formations and the fossil record of life. Again, yes, time would be or could be needed to form, if we're to interpret the geological column as columns of time. That would be necessary to have time in a closed system. That's why time is very important. Okay, but what about, that's in the Western system. What about in a non-Western system? And we're looking at time, we're looking at creation from a non-Western point of view. The non-Western Hebrew culture belief is an open system. What does that mean? Well, God is the eternal resource. this system does not depend on energy, matter, and time, and just over time it makes things without a purpose. No, this was created, and God is outside of time, and He created within time what now exists. In beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. His revelation then teaches that He created all in 6 literal days not that long ago. That is what the Hebrew culture believed in its beginning. Okay. The open system, which is the Hebrew thought system, the non-Western, is an open system, and it does not need time for the existence of all the created elements. Why? They were created. They were elements that were originally part of the creation. They were created elements. In time, over time? No, within time. So in other words, it's the non-Western concept of time. It's what happens within time. The marking of time is not important. It's that what happened within the time. And what happened within the time? God created the elements. Number 2, the existence of soil. Is that a product of time? They would say no, it was a product of creation. God created the soil within the time. He did not wait for it to be a product of erosion. Erosion has added to what God created. But God created a garden that was fully functioning within 1 week, according to the non-Western thinking pattern. Out of what? Well, it wasn't processes that were slow and gradual or uniform. It was God created adequate soil base to trees, plants to thrive. So that was open system. The gift of life came from God, the eternal possessor of life. So in other words, life was created. Life was given from the Creator, the possessor of life. It was not a process. It was not something that happened over eons of time, marking off time. It was an event that happened within time, that God created life. And the diversification of life, number 4, was from a single command, not from a single cell. So in other words, God commanded. First, God commanded, let the earth produce, and the earth produced. God commanded the waters, produce, and the waters produced. So in other words, number 4 is the diversification of life is not because of time, or starting from a singular event or singular life cell, but it is the diversification of life from a single command or multiple commands from God that said, let it produce life. Number 5, the geological formations and the fossil record is a record of death. It's not a record of life. And it's a record of an event or events, not a record of time. See, there's cultural differences on how to understand those strata, the rock strata. There's a huge difference. And there could be scientists that are non-Western that understand things in a whole different way than a Western scientist would understand them. Okay, so what would a non-Westerner propose as scientific evidences for a young Earth? Well, a non-Westerner is working with an open system. So within that open system, what could he point at that would indicate that, say, that doesn't require time? Well, the first one, erosion, soil. To have soil, he would point to God created the garden. God created the dirt. God created it as dirt. He didn't wait for it to erode. He created it as it is. And then he could actually point to the non-Westerner, say, look at the continents today, the continental erosion. And if the world was billions of years old, if the earth was 1 billion years old, at the current erosion rate, there would be no continents. or there would be new continents. Because of the erosion rate of today, the continents would be gone within approximately 10 million years. But yet on our continents that are eroding, there are fossils. There is a geological column. There is things still present, but yet they're being eroded. And they're being eroded at a rate that's faster than supposedly what that column represents in age. So they're kind of like, okay, continental erosion of current rates today contradict the geological column that still exists, because the rates are faster than what that column represents, supposedly in time. Okay, continental erosion. Ocean salt accumulation. They say there's this, yes, the ocean has a salt accumulation, but it continues accumulating and it continues raising in its percentage of salt content. And with each influx, with each runoff river bringing in, it brings in more erosion and more salt content that turns into the salt content, which says that that process has not been going on for billions of years, nor hundreds of millions of years. It is an indicator that it's been going on for a shorter period of time. Well, how about then they could point to the Earth's magnetic field. It is decaying, the Earth's magnetic field. I don't remember the decay rate exactly, but it is not huge. The half-life, it is something like in the thousands of years that the Earth's magnetic field is losing half of its strength every few thousands of years. And I don't remember the number exactly, but you can't extrapolate back millions of years with the same decay rate as it is today, because then that would mean that the magnetic field was so strong, this would have been a star. This would have been so heated that no life would have been able to be sustained on it. So they could point to the magnetic field of its decay rate today, but then some would say, but there's reversals. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, there are reversals, but reversals do not recuperate the original. It reverses direction, but the heat that it produces and the decay rate stays the same. So another one, the recession of the moon. And this is really fascinating. In the earlier lecture series on the origin of the universe, on the different planets within our solar system, is that they're all rotating in different directions at different speeds, and they're made up of different materials. 4 or 5 of the planets aren't even solid, they're gas giants. And so it's kind of like from one explosion, you would expect to have similar material ejected at similar speeds and forces with similar energy, which is not the case, in that the moon is not of the composition of what the Earth is. And so the moon, it'd be hard pressed to say that the moon came out of the Earth from an impact. But what the moon is doing is that the moon is spinning, moon is in orbit, and that orbit is trying to free itself from the orbit of the Earth, and it is doing so at a very small rate of, I don't know how many centimeters or how many millimeters it is per year, but the moon is separating itself from the Earth. And if you take today's rate, uniform rate, and you go back millions of years or billions of years, the moon would be too close. The moon would be touching the Earth after I don't know how many millions of years. So it can't be billions if we assume the uniform processes that we observe today. So in other words, there are a few examples of saying that, okay, there are some that are saying that the solar system, the Earth, cannot be billions of years. But again, all the proof offered, any scientific proof offered, is based on interpretations according to the hermeneutic principles established by the house's basic beliefs and chosen source of reliable knowledge. It's a philosophical system. So all the proofs offered are basically proofs that are from a belief system. And again, we have the house, and you go through the process. You've got the Weltbild, which is the underneath, the house, the culture, the assumed source of reliable knowledge, the basic belief system that establishes the rules, that forms a philosophical system. Then you have the methods of how to apply the rules and how to get to truth. Then you have the resources, and the resources of time, matter, and energy, or God in his in something, and everything. Something has to be eternal in whichever house you build. So here's the house, just a refresher on how it goes up and down, and what it contains, and how it's built on a belief system. So in other words, any scientific proof offered is based on interpretations, so that are based on a belief system. So what is your belief? Don't try to take interpretations from one belief system and harmonize them with a different belief system, because you're going to erode the original system or a system in the process. They don't go together. Each system has their own interpretations, has their own evidences, has their own science. The question of how old the earth is not answered by scientific proofs. How old the earth is rather, it is answered by the assumed source of reliable knowledge and the related beliefs, basic beliefs. How old do I need the earth to be? And am I using a closed system or open system to look out at the earth? Is it a closed system, meaning that I believe everything is here through natural processes, and therefore it must have took millions and billions of years? Then time is essential. Time is a part of the house. Time, matter, and energy with chance is what has formed it. So time is an important element, but is it Kairos time or is it Chronos time? And that is the two different elements or two different cultures that are looking at the whole process. Time. Yes, time is important, and time is running out. Time is precious, and we need to understand why we're here and how much time we've got left and what are we supposed to do with it. And that will depend on our belief system. And I believe that God has given us this time, and that he has given us this time to choose our belief system and to choose it wisely. Thanks again for listening. This is the conclusion of the origin of time. The next one we go on to the origin of life, origin of species, origin of man, origin of fossil record, and the origin and great mystery of the dinosaurs. So hope that you continue with me, and hope to see you in the next one. Thanks again.